warm, wonderful afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for holding your patience. Really apologize for being late for a few minutes. There's some technical glitch at our end, but I'm really happy to be back this new year of 2022 with our sessions. As you all know, we have our guest speaker today is Fazil. This session will be talking about AWS storage service. This is week 3, and we'll have Fazil. Before I hand over to Fazil to enlighten us with this talk, I'll quickly give you a quick introduction about Fazil. I think we all know who's Fazil all about, but let me give you a quick walkthrough about it. So Fazil is an AWS user group Hyderabad lead. He's as well as the founder as well as the CEO of ecom.in. And I think we all renowned Fazil across different communities because of his contribution and the kind of work he do for the community. So I'm very happy to have Fazal as a guest speaker here. So Fazal, the stage is yours. People are really looking forward to your today's session. Hope you have a wonderful session today. Please go ahead and share your screen.
Hey Sanchit, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Too much of praise, but anyways, thank you and a very warm welcome again, once again to everyone. So today's session will be on storage. Sanchit, I think, I have both my screen and the cam on the same thing, so probably you can just switch. Like if you could exit, that would be fine. Yep. Okay. So once again, everyone, a happy new year. Glad to see you all here right on the 2nd of the new year itself. So today what we are going to do is we're going to cover the storage solutions on AWS, and this is actually session 5 of the AWS Solutions Architect Associate certification bootcamp that we're doing as part of the community effort in trying to get more people certified. So I hope you've already seen the previous sessions. If you have not, we have it on the same YouTube channel. All of them are up and available, so you can go ahead and have a look at all of the sessions that are previously done by Sanchit, by me, and as well as other speakers on existing services that we have covered. So having said this, let's move into today's session. So we're going to look at all of the additional storage services that are there on AWS, like EFS or Elastic File System, FSX for Windows, FSX for Lustre. We'll do an overview because we can't kind of spin up a Lustre's cluster right now. We'll talk about AWS Storage Gateway and all of the different transport and edge solutions as to how you can bring your data into AWS. And then finally, we'll kind of wrap up with talking about AWS Backup. Now, I know when you say storage, there are a couple of things that are missing here, which is basically EBS and S3. But if you look at the AWS storage portfolio, it's quite a vast portfolio. So you have a lot of different services with regards to the types of storage, right? So for block storage, you have EBS. For file storage, you have EFS, FSX for Windows, and FSX for Lustre. And under the object storage, you have S3 as well as S3 Glacier. And then under a hybrid solution, you have the storage gateway family, and then all of the transport solutions like DataSync, SFTP, and Snow families kind of come in how you can bring data into AWS. And then obviously we have the backup option as well. Now, in our previous sessions, in fact, the first session, I believe Sanchit had already covered S3 and Glacier in pretty detail. So please go have a look at that. We'll just talk very briefly about it today because it itself obviously deserves a separate session, which we've already done. And in our previous session, when we did EC2, we also talked about EBS. So EBS being your EC2 hard drive, so to say, right? So we've already kind of touched on EBS as well. So we look at the other solutions as of today. So let's kind of start off with the file storage aspect. So we look at EFS and FSX for Windows and FSX for Lustre. So when we talk about file data, we're talking about unstructured data, right? So this can be, your regular files like your Excel files or your Word documents, your PDFs, This can be your media files, like your video, audio files. This can be even your code that you're kind of creating. This can be IoT data that is being generated. So there's no particular structure to all of this data when you say file data. So you need a solution that kind of fits all of these requirements, right? Because, for example, if you say databases are very specific in different types of structures of databases, right? So here you have file data that is unstructured, so you need to have a solution that covers all of these options. So we have three options when we talk about file storage on AWS. We have EFS, which is kind of a fully managed shared file system, right? And then we have FSX for Windows, which is kind of the same concept as EFS, but it is kind of custom built for Windows solutions. And then if you really want a high performance shared file system, then you probably want to go with Amazon FSX for Lustre. Lustre is kind of like, how do you say this? It's kind of like a cluster-based storage system that's based on a very high-performance storage solution known as Lustre, right? So you kind of, if you need extremely high performance when you're talking about like big data and all of that, that's kind of where you go for Lustre. Our session will be more concentrated today around EFS and FSX for Windows, right? Because Lustre itself is a different technology altogether. You need to kind of know Lustre, how to kind of plug that into FSX as well. So when we talk about file data, the common question that I would normally ask people is if you would have to share data between your instances or between any of the systems that you have in your environment, and if there is no managed file solution for it, like how do you go about doing this, right? How do you go build out a shared solution if you do not have a managed file system available for you? So let's say you have an EC2 instance, right? So you have an EC2, and that has a couple of EBS volumes attached to it. Remember last time we talked about EBS, which is basically the hard disk of your EC2 instance, right? Now, one of these is your root volumes. So that EC2 needs that root volume, so we're not going to share that. But I am using this second volume as a data volume, right? So this is a data volume, and I need to kind of share data that I'm saving here across multiple instances, right? So I have other instances that are part of my environment. So all of these are EC2s. And all of these have their own EBS volumes because obviously they need a root volume in order for them to perform or function correctly. So how do I share this data that is on this EBS volume attached to another EC2 instance when you don't have a managed solution? So this involves a lot of self setup and a lot of self maintenance. This basically means that you have to convert this server into a file server first of all, right? So you basically have to install like an NFS software on it, right? And then once you do that, this whole server essentially becomes like a shared storage server, right? Or basically you can call this an NFS server because once you install the NFS application on it, NFS stands for network file share. So once you install the application on it, the disks attached to this particular instance, you can kind of share it across other instances on the network, right? So what happens here is when you create the NFS, you get this EBS volume and you will get something called a mount point, right? And all of these other EC2 instances can basically connect to that mount point wherein your EC2 instance now can actually access that data in that EBS data volume, right? So this is how you would have to do it if you do not have a managed solution, which basically means you have to have your own EC2, you have to manage your own EBS volumes, you have to manage the backup and replication of these data on these volumes. Of course, you need to now create another replica, which ensures that you have high availability, right? Which means you have another EC2 and you have EBS volumes that are attached to that, and you kind of have to replicate data across. So there's a lot of management involved in this, right? So you basically have to spend a lot of your own time trying to configure this and doing all of this yourself. So a better picture would be something like this, where essentially you are having two file servers that you're creating across two different AZs. which have their volumes attached. And then you are kind of creating this NFS share, which is basically you're making these file servers as NFS servers, and then you're getting access to share the data, right? But like I said, this involves a lot of self-management. So here is where EFS comes in, right? What EFS does is it pretty much eliminates this entire process of you having to set up all of this yourself, right? And this is basically EFS, right? So EFS is a managed NFS service, right? Just like how you would set it up yourself, you would kind of get the option now, you would get a mount point onto which you're basically going to mount all of your other EC2 instances. But this share is known as EFS, and this is basically an NFS share itself, right? This is still kind of based on NFS version 1.1, I believe, which basically means that you get a mount point onto which you can connect all of your instances and share your data, right? So this is what EFS is. It's basically a managed file system that is available for you instead of you having to set up everything yourself. Like you can basically share this across thousands of instances. And also you don't need to worry about how many disks are there or how many EVS volumes and all of that, because this is completely scalable up to petabyte scale. And of course, you can have this durable as well, because it replicates in the backend across multiple devices, so you don't have to worry about durability. Also, it is available across multiple availability zones. You do have an option called infrequent access, whereby you can save a lot of money by saving data that you're not accessing that frequently at a lower cost, right? So this is kind of like S3's tiering system, where you have infrequent access in S3 as well, right? This is NFS v4 based. Sorry, did I say version 1.1? I was mistaken. It's NFS v4, which basically means that this is not going to work for Windows. Okay. For some reason, they have decided that they're not going to support NFS v4 based protocols or whatever. But you cannot directly hook up a Windows-based EC2 instance onto an EFS volume. So you're mostly going to see this being used by Linux instances. I mean, there are ways you can get it mapped, but that's not ideal for production. You could probably do it as some kind of a test setup or something. And you do have the option of backing up all of this data with AWS backup as well, right? I'm going to quickly stop 1 second and ask if anybody has any questions before I move forward. Okay, don't see any questions so far. All right, so how EFS is configured is essentially when you start up an EFS or when you create an EFS, you get the option of creating something called endpoints, right? So you create these endpoints wherever you want to actually share your data across. So if you're having multiple AZs, you're basically going to create EFS endpoints across those multiple AZs when you actually create your EFS share. So this way, your EC2 instances can basically directly connect to that endpoint and then access all of the data that's available on EFS from across all of these AZs, right? So you don't need to worry about availability and all of that, because it's kind of automatically mapped out for you, right? Okay, no questions? All right. So what we'll do now is we'll quickly create an EFS share, and we'll see how we can get instances connected to it, right? Just give me 1 second, let me pull up the interface. All right, so if you want to create an EFS share, you basically come to the EFS service first of all. So you just type in EFS and you come here and you will get this dashboard. This will show you what you have already created. So I already have one created, which kind of for the demo purposes itself. But what we'll do is I'll hit create file system. Now this is a little bit tricky, so you need to be careful here because this gives you minimal options, right? So when you try to configure with this, this is not going to give you all of the options that you might actually need, because it's just asking you for a name and the VPC, right? And whether you want it across multiple regions or across one zone. What you want to do is you want to skip this part and actually go directly into customize, because then you get more options in terms of all of the things that you want to customize for the EFS. So avoid that first screen and don't just like put in that, because then once you create that, there are a lot of things that you cannot change or cannot edit. So it might become kind of useless. So you just give it a name here, like demo EFS. And here you can create the EFS endpoint across multiple AZs within the region, or you can just have one AZ, right? But let's do multiple AZs. You have the option of enabling automatic backups. This will work through the AWS backup system. But for now, I'm just going to uncheck this. We're not going to do backups right now. You have the option of moving your objects that you're saving into infrequent access. This is where I told you can kind of save cost by putting your files into infrequent access. So unlike your S3, where you can actually create a lifecycle and you can specify exactly how many days later you want to move that into infrequent access, you don't get that option here per se, because you get like 7 days or 14 days or 30 days or whatever, right? So these are the preset selections that you get when you want to move the files, unlike with S3 lifecycle. So I'm just going to leave that at the default. Then you have different performance modes. You have general purpose and max IO, and you have throughput modes, which is bursting and provisioned. So I'm not sure if you kind of remember from our last session when we discussed EBS, we talked about the difference between IOPS and throughput, right? So IOPS is basically the speed of access for your data, as in how soon can you actually get to the data and how soon can you read that data, right? Or how soon can you, or rather, let me put it like how soon can you start reading the data, right? And or how soon can you start writing the data? So it's a speed of getting to that point of starting to do something. And when you're talking about throughput, this is about actually doing that thing, like how much data can you pull out or how much data can you put in per second, right? So throughput will always talk about speed in terms of megabytes per second, gigabytes per second, and all of that. And performance mode is basically IOPS, where you talk about how many actions can you perform within a second, right? So I would suggest you leave this at general purpose and leave this at bursting, but you do have the option of selecting max IO. This would definitely be recommended if you're having more than like 2-3 instances, right? So don't just leave it at general purpose if you're having more than 2 instances, because it'll kind of be slow. The other option is throughput, where you can actually provision exactly how much throughput you need, and you can have this between 1 megabyte per second and up to 1 gigabyte per second. But yeah, this is quite expensive because per megabyte you're actually charged for the throughput. So unless you know exactly the reason why you're doing this, and if you actually need that speed, then you can probably go for the provision throughput. Otherwise, you can just leave it to bursting, because you will get a decent speed, but there is no guarantee in how much speed that you will get, right? So you need to be careful in these selections. For now, I'm just going to leave this at general purpose and bursting. You have the option of encrypting your data. I am going to uncheck that for now, but if you do select that, you need to actually ensure that you actually have a KMS key, which you're going to use for encryption. And because I don't have that right now, I'm just going to uncheck this for now. And then obviously you can put in your tags. And I'll go next. So here is where you select your VPC and which subnets do you want to put this in. So in this account at this moment, I just have the one default VPC, and I have the 3 availability zones because I'm in Mumbai right now. And here are the 3 subnets that I'm selecting. So essentially, this is where I'm saying that I actually need these endpoints, right? So across these multiple AZs, I'm basically saying that I need these 3 endpoints created across these 3 different AZs, or these 3 different subnets. You want to make sure that you select a security group that is appropriate for the EFS, because by default, it will obviously take the default, So by default, it will take the default security group. So you don't want that. You probably want to select like your own security group that you created for your EFS or something like that. For example, I think I do have one. Yeah. I do have one EFS SG here. So you want to remove the default security groups that are there and then add your EFS security group, right? And then go next. You do have some additional options here. So unless you know exactly the reasons why you're doing this, just leave it as it is. Because this is more like trying to have a more secure policy around how the reads and write happens on your system, on your EFS system. So if you go next, and here is all of the predefined parts of our EFS, which is all the selections that we made, and then all you need to do is basically hit create, right? Now this could take a little bit of time depending on how many AZs that you have selected. If it's a single AZ, it's almost instantaneous, but if you have multiple AZs, it could take a few minutes to start up. So instead, what I've done is I've already created one here, which is kind of the exact same settings that I mentioned right now. Yeah. So what we'll do now is we'll actually create a couple of instances where we're going to use them for accessing the data across, accessing that data on those EC2 instances. Accessing the data on the EFS, right? So let me just quickly create a couple of instances. So always remember, when we talked about EC2 last time, you need to kind of already have your security groups kind of created and all of that set up. So when I ran through that, almost all of that was already set up. So you need to kind of make sure that's already there before you kind of do it. Okay, so let me just wait for my instances to come up. So this is the EFS that I've already set up. And as you can see, there is already some files on it, about 89 megabytes. Now, one thing you should understand, or you must actually know, is the fact that when you have bursting selected, the performance or the speed is kind of dependent on how much data that you have saved, right? So if you actually have not much data, for example, this is like nothing, right? This is like 0.1 gigabyte. So if this is the case, then the drive is going to be extremely slow, right? So you need to be careful in whether you are actually selecting bursting or selecting the exact throughput. You'll start to see the benefit when you have multiple gigabytes of data, like when you have 10 gigabytes, 20 gigabytes, or 100 gigabytes. I think somewhere around 100 gigabytes is probably when you're going to start to see the real performance come in, because the performance is linked to how many gigabytes you've actually stored on EFS, right? So the speed of access can be different depending on how much data you've stored. Okay, so our EC2 instances have come up here. Let me just rename this to 2. And let me go ahead and log into them. Okay, so I'm on both my EC2 instances at the moment. So this one is the system 1 and this is the system 2. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, these EC2s at the moment, if you kind of do like a command like df-h, you can see if there is any drives that are already mapped. And as you can see here, it's just the existing normal root EBS volume. And those are all the other ones are like temporary file systems automatically created by the OS, but you don't see like EFS already mapped over here, right? So you can actually connect it if you go into EFS and you have this option called attach over here on the top right. If you click on that, then you will get the commands that you need to kind of run in order for attaching the EFS file system. Now, because we are using an AWS AMI, you can basically use this command. You kind of don't need to, or in fact, you can use this as well. You don't need to kind of install anything, right? But we do need to create a folder first where we want to mount it, because in Linux, whenever you want to mount something like a drive or something, you need to kind of have a folder for that, right? So let's go to our root and let's actually make a directory and let's call that EFS, right? So I'm just creating a directory on both the EC2 instances and I'm calling that as EFS. So I'm basically going to map that EFS to this folder, right? So then all I need to do is copy this command and just paste it in here, enter, and looks like it's already mapped. Now, obviously this looks pretty easy, but truth be told, there is a little bit of stuff that you have to do before you do this, especially with your security groups, right? You need to ensure that your EC2 instance security groups are actually allowed access into the EFS security group, right? Remember, I selected the security groups when we created EFS. So when you do that, you need to kind of make sure that you actually allow the access before you run this command. Otherwise, it's just going to be stuck at this line where you're trying to run it and it's not going to connect. Okay, so now that that's done, let me just clear this. And if I do a df-h now, you can see that now I have a EFS drive mapped, right? And you can see it's currently 88 megabytes in size, and it's mapped to the EFS folder. And same case with my EC2 over here. If I do a df-h, you can see it's mapped, right? Now, both these EC2s are connected to the same EFS, okay? So if I go into that folder, so if I go into cd EFS on both of them, so right now I'm looking at what is on EFS, right? So if I say ls, you can see that there's already a folder on EFS, which I created the last time, right? And the files are actually inside that. So if I go again into that samples folder and then I do another ls, you can see that these files are already there on the EFS, right? So you can see that these files are already there on the EFS. So what you're seeing is both these EC2s are basically seeing the same thing. Okay, so do not mistake this for replication. This is data is not getting replicated to both these EC2s. That's not what's happening here. Both these EC2s are looking at the same location. So by that, if I actually go back, like if I go to the root of the EFS, you can see that there is a folder in EFS already there, right? But I'm not worried about that folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file on this from this EC2. I'm going to create a file in EFS, right? So if I just say touch abc.txt, I'm just creating a blank file called abc.txt, right? So if I do this, I'm creating this file inside this EFS folder, which basically means I'm creating it inside EFS, right? So if I hit enter and if I do ls, you can see that the file that I created is there now, right? If I do ls, you can see the file that I created is actually there right now. But is it actually going to be on this instance as well? In fact, it is. If I do an ls-la, you can see that even on that instance, it's actually available because this is not getting replicated. It's just looking at the same location. Again, if I do touch 1, 2, 3 on the first system, and if I come to the second system and I do like ls-la, you can see that that file is also there, right? So this is, I'm just demonstrating to you that this is basically a shared file system. Here's how you can share your data across multiple EC2 instances. Quickly stopping here to ask if there is any questions, please do post it in the chat. All right, so there's a question: for large amount of data storage, should we select provision throughput while creating? At what kind of conditions provision throughput is recommended? So you definitely want to do provision throughput if you don't have a lot of data, okay? Because like I said, the performance is kind of linked to your per GB requirement. So if you do not have a lot of data and you actually need some proper working speed, then you definitely want to do provision throughput, all right? The other reason why you would want to do provision throughput is if you want to ensure that you have a guaranteed speed for reads and writes, right? You don't want like 5 megabyte per second or something like that on a file system which is being having a lot of files, because then it's going to be extremely slow. Because it's, if you say 5 megabytes per second, that's for the entire EFS, and you might have thousands of systems that are accessing it, right? So you definitely want more than that. So in those cases where you want to ensure that there is like a minimum guaranteed speed always, then you definitely want to go with provision throughput. I hope that answers your question. There's another question, how data replication works in EFS. So I'm not completely sure like which part of the replication you're talking about. If the data is replicated within EFS, like in terms of storing it on EFS, or are you talking about like across AZs or something like that? Because remember here, data is actually not getting replicated. When I showed you both of the instances, they are basically looking at the same location. Like it's the same folder that they're looking at on the EFS, right? So it's actually not getting replicated. But if you're asking about what about the data in the backend, like how is it getting stored? Well, obviously with every storage service that AWS provides, they're not storing it on like one volume or one disk, right? That data is getting replicated across multiple volumes. We just don't know exactly how many volumes and how they do that. But that your data is actually available across multiple volumes. I hope that is. Yeah, so when you select regional or AZ, if you, for example, if you select AZ and you select only one AZ, when you create EFS, the data that they are storing is only getting replicated on devices within that AZ, right? So the problem comes up is if the AZ goes down, your EFS becomes unavailable, right? For all of the other EC2 instances, any EC2 that's available anywhere. So you definitely want to do regional setup for your EFS, because if you do that, EFS in the backend will automatically replicate that data across EFS devices that are available in multiple AZs, right? So that even if one AZ fails, your data is still accessible. This is the main reason you want to either select, you really want to go with regional, because if you go with AZ, if one AZ goes down, then your data becomes unavailable. Your data is not lost, but it becomes unavailable until the region is back up. Okay, I hope those answers the questions. Let's move on to the next topic. If you're doing this labs, please ensure that you actually terminate all of the EC2s that you're creating, as well as you delete the EFS share. For now, I'm just going to leave this on because I do want to show you a demo later on when we talk about storage data and all of that. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about FSX for Windows. Now, the simplest way I'm going to put this is that this is almost exactly like EFS, but it is kind of built for Windows. Because remember, I told you EFS itself is NFS version 4 based, which doesn't really work with Windows. So if you really want a shared storage system, managed storage system available on AWS, you need to, for Windows, you need to kind of go for FSX for Windows. The advantage here is that you can actually map this for both Linux and Windows, right? So unlike your EFS, which only mostly works with Linux-based systems, or in fact, any system that supports NFS v4, with FSX, you can actually map it for both your Windows systems as well as your Linux systems. The difference here is that this actually involves the use of something like Windows Active Directory, right? So for those of you who have worked in the Windows space might know about this, but this is basically where you're setting up something called a domain controller, and you need to kind of base your user permissions on that domain controller, right? So if you need to run FSX for Windows, you do need to ensure that you either have a domain controller that you have created yourself, or you need to either use AWS's managed Windows AD, all right? So you do have that option where you can just spin up AWS managed Active Directory, or you can create your own Active Directory. So Active Directory is kind of a requirement if you want to have your FSX for Windows available. This is kind of based on Microsoft's distributed file system, or DFS. You do have something called data deduplication here, which kind of allows you to ensure that you're not having a lot of duplicates of your data here. This is kind of a feature of FSX for Windows. So what happens here is basically you have your EC2s that are across your AZs. You have the FSX that you're creating, which is basically the Windows file server. And then you are basically doing the endpoint, just like how we did the EFS endpoint. You're basically creating an endpoint, which is then going to make it accessible for the Windows file server. You can obviously have like FSX, which is across multiple AZs. Same thing like we did with EFS, which makes sure that the availability is there for your file systems. But like I said, you need to ensure that you also have a Windows Active Directory running, apart from setting up FSX. Here is a whole list of things that FSX can do. I will probably leave this to you whenever you find the time to go through the slides. You can have a look at all of these features. But let's go ahead and jump into the demo. So like I said, a prerequisite is that you need an Active Directory for creating this. So we'll go ahead and create an FSX share for Windows. We'll map the share to Windows and Linux instances, and we'll share the data between them. All right. So let's switch. All right. So just like the EFS, I already have an FSX system created because this does take a long time to get set up. So for me, I think this took at least about 30 minutes to fully get set up before it became available to access. So I'll walk you through the steps and then we'll come back and try to make use of this. So for FSX, once you type in FSX, you get the option and you come to this screen. Then you can create a file system. Now, they did recently add another option into this, which is basically NetApp ONTAP. This is also a type of storage solution. So if you want to create like a shared storage on top of that, you can do that. Again, this is a managed NetApp ONTAP. It's a AWS managed service that they give you. So this is not something that you're running yourself. This is not like your own NetApp ONTAP, right? So this is different. It's AWS managed. And we'll talk about Lustre a little bit later on. But we're doing Windows FSX for Windows File Server. So we'll select that and we'll go next. And then obviously you'll give it a name. So again, just like our EFS, we do get the option of doing multi-AZ or single AZ. And then you have the option of whether you want SSD storage or HDD storage. This kind of goes back to our EBS volume conversation from our last session. Like we talked about some of the differences between them, right? You need to have a minimum of 32 gigabytes that you're assigning over here. And you can go up to 65 terabytes. Here, again, you can actually specify the throughput if you wish to, but unlike your EFS, you can't specify exactly. You have to kind of select one of these throughput options, right? So let me actually just show you. So this is the cost, but then okay, I think they might have put that somewhere else. Yeah, probably I'll pull that up separately because they do give, like you do get the option of seeing how much it would cost you depending on what you're selecting. If I remember correctly, I think if I'm not mistaken, each of this step would cost you an additional $30 to $90 a month or something like that additional. But anyways, I'll pull that up later and we'll check on that. But you do get to select the option in terms of exactly how much throughput you need, but then you have to select from one of these. You don't get to do it like your EFS. There's no option of selecting IOPS here because that's kind of maximum IOPS that you get. Okay, you get to select your VPC. Again, you need to ensure that you have a security group created. I've already created a security group, so I can just select that FSX security group. I need to make sure that I select the AZs that I want to put it in, because I have selected multi-AZ. So I need to like select whether I want to put it in 1A and 1B or something like that. And this is where you have to select the Active Directory. So if you have already created an AWS managed Active Directory, which you can actually go ahead and create over here under the directory service, you can actually create your own AWS managed Active Directory. But this is a little bit expensive, because they do actually spin up two EC2 instances as part of this, not a single EC2. So it can maybe cost you at least around 15 cents every hour. So it can be a little bit expensive. Okay. Or you can choose the option of a self-managed Active Directory. Now, I've already created an EC2 instance with Windows on it, and I've actually converted that EC2 instance into a domain controller, and I've made it an Active Directory with a domain name. So that's already set up. I mean, if you want to do this, the easier option would honestly be that you go just set up a AWS managed Active Directory. But if you are already familiar with how to do this on Windows, then you can actually go ahead and start up your own EC2 and do this. But now that I've set that up, all I need to really do is I need to give the domain name that I've set up for my Active Directory. In my case, I've set it up called domain.local, right? And you need to give the DNS server, which is basically the EC2 instance itself, right? So if I copy this IP address, I will put that in. Then you need to kind of give a username that is part of your Active Directory that has access to the setup, like it needs access to create users. So you need to create an account here that is part of your Active Directory, right? I'm going to skip this section now. And that is pretty much it. You can actually go ahead and hit next and create it. This is the encryption. So encryption is actually, it's not optional. You have to enable it by default. You have the option of logging everything that's happening. You have the option of specifying additional DNS aliases that are there. Again, just like every storage solution, you have the option of automatic backups. You can disable it or enable it, and you have the option of tags, and all you do is hit next. So you need to, if you're actually doing this with your own Active Directory, you need to actually look at this validation tool, FSX network validation tool, and ensure that it's actually working before you specify the values over here. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you hit next, it'll take half an hour, it will fail at the end, and then you don't have an option of editing it. You have to recreate the whole thing again, right? So instead of doing that, make sure that you validate it first before you actually go ahead and create it. Now, like I said, I've already created this. So here is my FSX share that is available, and it is basically associated with my Windows Active Directory over here. So I need to show you how to access this. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to make use of VPN, because I'm going to try to map this FSX to my local system here where I'm sitting. Okay. Now, normally you wouldn't be able to do that because you can't publicly access an FSX file system. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect via VPN into AWS, which will make me local on AWS, and then I can basically use my own system to map it, right? I hope this works, because demos can always go wrong. So what I'm going to do is go into this, and here is all of the FSX details that are available, and then you get the option to attach, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first get my VPN connected, right? So I have multiple VPN options that are available here. I'm going to select this. I hope my connection doesn't get disconnected. Let's see. Oh, I forgot to turn this on. All right, I'm just activating my VPN because I had kind of disabled it before. Okay, that's going to take a few minutes to get activated. So what I'm going to do in the meanwhile is I'm going to map this FSX to one of my Linux instances that is already available, the same one that we kind of used. So this is the system 2. So let me actually go back to the root. So if you see here, we already have the EFS mapped on our EC2 instance. That's already there. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to map this FSX to this EC2 instance. So I'll click on attach. And here you will get all of the commands that you basically need to use in order to map your FSX share. Now, this is if you're using Windows, and if you open this, this is basically if you're using Linux. Now, you need to install the CIFS utilities on your Linux instance before you're able to do this. So let me quickly do that. Let me install CIFS utilities. Now, before I do map it, what should I be doing? Like, if I need to map it, what do I need? I basically need a folder with the name that I'm going to map it to, right? So I'm actually going to create a folder or a directory, and I'm just going to call this FSX, right? Let me just first show you. So right now you can see that there's no folder called FSX over here. This EFS is the last time the one that we created. So I'm going to create a new directory. I'm going to call this FSX. Now if I run the same list command here, you can see now that this directory is there, right? FSX, which was not there before. All right, so now that I've created a directory, I can basically go ahead and map it to that. So I'll copy this command. And I will map that to /FSX. Okay, when you do this, like I said, because this is associated with your Active Directory, you need the permissions in order to map it, right? So let me actually copy the username and password. So this will be the Active Directory username password that you created when you created the FSX share. Remember, you created I told you that you have to create a service account, which can actually create the users. So this will be that. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. My mistake. Okay, I made a small mistake here. The command itself, I have to modify this user at domain. Okay. So this will basically be, let me copy this to a notepad and I'll show you what is different. Okay, so I need to substitute this with my Active Directory user. So I'll do that. My Active Directory user is basically administrator at domain.local. Remember, my domain name is domain.local. So I'll copy this. And then I'll go back to my EC2. I'll run that command again, with this time with the correct username. And then I just need to input the password, which I will do right now. And there you go. It looks like it's mapped, but we can obviously verify that by going and doing df-h. And sure enough, you can see that it's actually mapped. And remember, when we created our FSX, I had selected 32 gigabytes. You can see over here that the 32 gigabytes is selected and it's mapped. Let's look and see if there is anything inside that. So if I go to cd fsx and if I do an ls, yes, these are kind of the similar files that are there on EFS, because I was actually copying across same files. So you will see the similar thing over here. But let's actually create a directory within this, and I'm going to call this test. Now, if I do an ls, you can see that directory is there called test. I will go into that directory, and obviously this directory is empty. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, see if my VPN is active. Okay, it's still in pending associate, probably another couple of more minutes on that. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start a virtual machine on my PC. Okay, so this is on my PC. It's basically a Windows 10 system. Now, the reason I'm not going to be able to map it to my local system right now directly is because I need to, first of all, attach my local system to the domain, right? Which basically means I have to change my networking configuration. I have to restart my system, etc. So that's not going to happen right now. So instead, I'm just going to do this on my virtual machine. Okay, so this is basically a Windows virtual machine, which I'm going to use. So just think of this as a local machine on my PC. Okay, although I'm not directly using my PC, it's still on my PC. Now I've already mapped this as a domain system. So this system is already connected to the Active Directory at domain.local, right? So I mean, some of this, if it doesn't make sense, guys, it's perfectly fine, because this does involve a little bit of Windows. So if you're not familiar with the Windows space, you're not going to use much of FSX, but you should be aware that such an option is there if at all you ever come across dealing with Windows based storage. Okay, so here I have, let me just first show you. Yeah, let me just first show you that this PC is already connected to the domain. So if you look at my system here, this local system is already connected or attached to the domain. Okay, so it says domain.local here, it's already attached to the domain. So this should essentially allow me to now do connections, anything with regards to the Active Directory. Okay. Okay, so let me see if my VPN is up. Okay, my VPN is available now. So I will go ahead and first connect my VPN. Okay, my VPN is now connected, which means now I have local access to my EC2s. I have local access to the Active Directory. Just to show you as a quick example over here. This was the EC2s that we created just now for EFS, right, to access EFS. And I'm going to take the private IP. Okay, I'm just going to take the private IP, which means unless I'm on the same network, I'll never be able to ping the private IP, right? So let me see if it works. Okay, let me actually change one setting here, because I think the security groups. Okay, that's already enabled. Let me see if I can ping my Windows. Yeah, just that probably the port is not open on that. But anyways, you can see here I've actually pinged the local Windows system, the IP address, the private IP address, and as you can see, it works, right? So now I'm actually connected to AWS privately using the VPN. Okay, so how can I map this? So if I go back here, and if I use, so I'm back on the FSX screen, guys. So I'm on the FSX screen and I'm doing attached for FSX. And here I'm going to attach my Windows system, right? So I'm actually going to copy this entire thing. And I'm going to go to my Windows system. This is my local system. Let me first show you what is currently mapped and what is not mapped. So you can see here there is the drive that I want to map is currently not mapped. Okay, this is another drive. Okay, so these are the ones that are currently available. But let me go ahead and map this right now. So I'm just going to copy paste that command as it is, and I'm going to map it as Z drive, right? And enter. So it's asking me for a username. This will be the same thing that we just did with on our Linux system. So I'll give it the administrator domain.local, and then the password. Oops, I think I typed it twice. Okay, done. And as you can see, as soon as it's done, you see the shared drive came up here, right? So if I were to open up this shared drive now, this is what is actually available on my FSX right now. These are the files that are actually there on my FSX. And as you can see, I can see it on my Windows system. And here is that test folder that I created on my EC2 instance, right? Where is that? Here is that test folder that I created. And if you can see, if I open up this test, it's actually empty, which is obviously the case here. It is empty, but let me actually create a file. So I'm creating a file on my EC2 on AWS, and I'm going to see that same file here on my local system because I'm connected to the same shared drive, right? So I'm going to do touch new file. There you go, new file created, right? So you can see no matter where your system is, right? If you're connected to the shared FSX file system, regardless of whether it's Windows, regardless of whether it's Linux, you can still share your data across all of these instances. Any questions so far? Let me just revise what I currently just did. I can. Okay, so what I had was I created FSX, all right, and I already had all of this is basically within. In fact, let me be a little bit smaller. So all of this is basically within AWS. Okay, so within AWS, I created the FSX, and then I also had my Active Directory, which was basically my EC2. Okay, and let me just show you that Active Directory. So this is my Active Directory instance. This is basically a Windows instance which I converted to a domain controller Active Directory, and that's what I'm using, right? So FSX actually has the access to the Active Directory, and it ensures that it looks up the users that are created on the Active Directory in order to give access. So on this, I had created a Linux instance, right? So this was my EC2 Linux, and I had basically got it mapped to my FSX, right? And then now here, where I'm at home, I have my PC inside which I basically create a virtual machine, but just think of it as my PC, which is running on Windows. And basically, I even map that to the FSX using VPN. Okay, if I didn't have VPN, this would not have been possible. And now, any files that I'm creating through Linux on FSX, for example, I created that folder called test. I created that folder called test from my EC2 Linux instance, and I was actually able to see that here as well, right? So, yep, so that's what we currently did right now. So there's another question here. Can we establish the FSX connection between two different VPCs? So tell me something right now. Is my home in the same VPC as my EC2 instance? No, it's a different network, right? So if you do VPC peering, or if you are using something called the other gateways that are available, peering gateways that are available, you can once the VPCs can communicate with each other, you can definitely do this. I showed you this at the extreme, right? So I am on a completely different network altogether, right? Of course, when I connected my VPN, I was kind of going into the same VPC, but then even if it was a different one, I can still get it mapped. The only thing that you need to be aware of is that when you're doing this, from whichever VPC you're doing this, you see you're using this DNS in order to map it, right? So whichever VPC you're connecting from, this DNS should be resolvable within that VPC. So that systems in that VPC should be able to find out the IP address of this. If this is resolvable from any VPC, you should be able to connect ideally. If this is not resolvable, then obviously, even if you're in the same VPC or different VPC, you're not going to be able to connect. As long as this domain name is resolvable, you should be able to. But with Linux, you see, we didn't actually use the DNS name. We actually used the IP. So technically speaking, if your IP is reachable, you should be able to connect, even if the DNS does not resolve. But it'll be an IP-based mapping. Okay, I hope that answers your questions. Any additional questions quickly? All right, I don't see any questions, so let's move on. So we created an FSX share for Windows, and we mapped it to both Windows and Linux instance. The Windows instance was basically on my local system over here, right? I am going to kind of temporarily keep this running. Let me actually pause this because I don't want to waste too much CPU right now on my system, because I'll need to come back to it later on. Okay, disconnect this for now. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about FSX for Lustre. Similar concept, but this is not based on your Windows-based DFS file system, which it's not based on Microsoft distributed file system, but it's basically a POSIX-based file system, which means any system, whether Linux, Windows, any kind of operating system, Mac or anything that supports POSIX-based file systems, you can basically map it to that. The difference here is that this is an extremely high performance share. So unlike with FSX, you had to spin up the FSX cluster, which was basically controlled by AWS fully, right? And then you also have to have an Active Directory. So the performance, there's a lot of criteria that come into the performance over here. But when we're talking about FSX for Lustre, Lustre itself is an extremely fast and efficient file storage solution that is already available. So this is kind of like a managed Lustre, and then they're putting FSX on top of it. FSX is just the name here, but essentially what you're getting ideally is actually a Lustre file system, what you're technically getting. FSX is just the name that AWS chose to give it, right? So this is what I can tell you as of now. There is the option of something called scratch disks as well as persistent options, which means within Lustre, you have the option of temporarily spinning up additional instances in order to manage the performance. And then when you don't need that performance, you can kind of remove those instances or remove those hard drives, etc. Right? So there's a little bit to Lustre over here, more than anything to do with FSX per se, right? So that's what I'm going to say as of it for this as of now. So if you do get any questions with regards to this in the exam, just be aware that this is used if you want an extremely high performance file share. All right, let's move on to the other ones. So we've kind of covered all the ones on the top, which is the block storage, which we did EBS in our last session, which is file storage, which we did right now, and object storage in our first week sessions. We already did that. Let's now talk about hybrid solutions. Let's talk about something called the AWS Storage Gateway. So it's basically, okay, before I go into explaining that, let me just pull this up picture and just show it to you like this. So Storage Gateway is a solution which will kind of let you integrate most of your storage solutions into like a one-stop solution, all right? Or you can think of this as a bridge between your on-prem as well as the AWS cloud, right? Because if this storage gateway did not exist, remember right now, when I did the mapping for FSX, what did I have to do? I had to first establish a VPN connection, right? I established a VPN, and then I manually mapped my workstation over the VPN. I mapped it to my FSX, right? What if I have hundreds of workstations that I need to do? Am I going to do like each mapping onto my FSX? I mean, you could do that, but that's a lot of management. That's a lot of headache in order to do that. Instead, what you would have here is you have a single entity that is within your environment, known as the storage gateway, and you're going to connect all of your systems to that storage gateway. You're going to map all of your systems to the storage gateway, and in the back end, all of this would be mapped to either FSX or EBS or S3, etc. Right? So it's kind of like a gateway to all of the storage solutions on AWS, right? We'll see how this works, but essentially there are like 3 or 4 modes in which this storage gateway works. So this is basically durability option for your on-prem. What I mean by durability option is the storage gateway, when you're creating it, this software for the storage gateway is given by AWS, right? You can run this software as a VM on your local on-prem. You can run this storage gateway as actually a hardware, which I will show you. You can actually purchase storage gateway hardware from AWS, and you can plug that into your existing data center. Or you can even use storage gateway on AWS itself, which we will talk about. But essentially what's happening here is this storage gateway is visible to all of the systems that are inside your on-prem, right? Whether it be your application servers, your workstations, etc. And this VM or this hardware server that you're going to have is also going to have volumes that are attached to it, right? So it also has its own storage, right? So when you are saving stuff, you are actually storing to the local disk of that storage gateway. In the back end, that local disk gets replicated to all of the storage services, whichever ones you have selected, it automatically gets replicated. So you are writing to the storage gateway, you are saving to the storage gateway, and that's getting replicated across to whichever storage service. If you have selected S3, it gets replicated to S3. If you have selected FSX, it gets replicated to FSX, etc. Right? What I mean by this is, even if this connection is non-existent, even if for some reason your connection to AWS is lost, you still have a local cache of your files. Now remember, this is a local cache. So this is not the actual storage server. It basically has the caching of the files that you've already written, right? So that cache is available in case if you want to just access those files that are there. So this is a true hybrid solution, which basically means that you have your data both on-prem as well as on AWS, okay? You don't really need to run your own NAS or your SAN solution if you're using storage gateway, because you're essentially copying all of your data into AWS. You have like a single interface for S3, EBS, Glacier, as well as AWS backup. There are different modes that are available: file gateway mode, volume gateway mode, tape gateway mode. We will talk about these different modes that are available. And because a local cache is also available of your files that you're writing to the storage gateway, there is very low latency in accessing those files, right? Because the cache is available locally, you don't always, like when this system needs a file that it saved, it doesn't need to go all the way to S3 to fetch that file, right? It is actually available in the local cache. It can basically fetch that, and it can get it at a very low latency. Now, when I keep saying local cache, this is kind of dependent on how much storage you're provisioning over here, okay? If you're maybe provisioning only 150 GB hard drive, then you're going to have cache only worth 150 gigabytes. So you have to be careful in how big you really need to make that. Otherwise, that data is going to go to S3 and it's not going to be available locally. Okay, there's a quick question here. How secure is AWS security gateway or storage gateway? I think you mean storage gateway, right? In case of connection lost to AWS. I'm not sure if I fully understood that question, because see, it's already on-prem, right? It's already within your environment. So it's already kind of secure in a way, right? If you're losing access to, like if you lost the connection to AWS, it's just that you are not able to access the files that are already on AWS. You can still access those files that are already present on the storage gateway because of the local cache, right? It's just, you're not going to get the files on AWS. Also adding to the above question, can we have a limit on the storage in AWS storage gateway? Yeah, so basically it depends on how large your cache drive is, right? So if your cache drive is only 150 gigabyte, you'll only have 150 gigabyte of storage that is available. So what happens here is that whatever you're storing here on your local gateway, on your storage gateway locally, it does get asynchronously replicated over to AWS, right? Whichever service you're selecting, it asynchronously gets replicated. How much you store here is really dependent on the size of the disks that you're actually putting up there. Now, there are some additional configurations that you can make, but for that, you need to actually go with the hardware that comes from AWS. And when I'm talking about the hardware, let me see if I can actually show you the physical. Yeah, so this is the actual hardware appliance. You actually get to buy this. So if this is useful, let me just switch back. So like I told you, the storage gateway is a software that AWS gives you, right? And you need to run it as a VM, ideally speaking. Now, you run it as a VM when you already have something like VMware, or you already have Hyper-V or something like that you're running inside your on-premises already, right? So if you're already doing that, then you can run the storage gateway as a VM. But what if you don't have an existing virtualized environment? What if you're not running Hyper-V? What if you're not running VMware? In that case, you can actually go and just buy this hardware from AWS, and you can literally plug it into one of your racks, and then you can use that. The reason I bought this up right now is because this is like a fully configurable storage gateway. So you do get a little bit more control over here in order to configure like how much of data you're caching and how much you want to store and how much you don't want to store and all of that. So you get a little bit more control over here. Okay. So there are 4 modes for AWS storage gateway. In fact, there used to be only 3, but they recently added the FSX as well. So you have the file gateway mode, you have the volume gateway mode, you have the tape gateway mode, and you have the FSX file gateway mode. So file gateway mode is basically the storage gateway is going to act as a file server. All right. Volume gateway mode, the storage gateway is going to basically act as a volume, or basically act as a hard disk, so to speak. Tape gateway is used when you're talking about tape drives and you're talking about archives and all of that. And we will talk more in detail about each one of these. For FSX, it's essentially going to get your FSX that you created mapped onto the storage gateway. All right. And we'll see how we can access that as well. So we'll see each one of these modes. So the storage gateway, like I said, it's basically an intermediary between your on-prem as well as AWS so that you can transfer data in and out. Now, you do have the option of running it as a VM, or you do have the option of running it as a hardware appliance. Now, for each of these modes, there is like an endpoint that gets created. So if you're running your storage gateway in file mode, it'll basically create an NFS endpoint, just like how we talked about EFS, where we mapped EFS using an endpoint onto our EC2 instance. Just like that, you will get an NFS endpoint, which you can just map to one of your systems or your application servers, right? If you're running it as a volume gateway, you will get basically an iSCSI endpoint, which is basically like a hard disk endpoint. Okay, so it's going to act like a hard disk. And if you're talking about storage gateway, you have something called a iSCSI VTL, or a virtual tape library. Too much information, I know. We'll talk about this in more detail a little bit later on, but I'm just telling you that these options are available. And what you see here on the right side are the options which you can map the storage gateway to. So when you're using file gateway, you will most likely be using S3 in order to map it in the backend. So when you use file gateway, all of the files that you're storing in your storage gateway basically get stored on S3, right? When you're using volume gateway, obviously you're going to make use of EBS. If you're running backups, obviously backups are going to get taken. If you're running tape mode, then you're going to have Glacier that's going to be used, Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive, because tape basically means archive, and obviously archive on AWS is Glacier. And then finally, if you're using FSX mode, you're basically going to use FSX for Windows. So like I said, you do have the option of running your own hardware appliance if you don't have a VM environment that you can use. Okay, just give me 1 second. I think my camera is interrupting the scene a little bit. Okay, I hope that's better. All right. You have a third option, which is if you don't have a VM that you can run within your environment, and if you don't have the money to obviously buy the hardware, because this is not cheap, it is expensive. You're buying a physical server, right? You're renting out a physical server, so it's going to be expensive. You can actually run the storage gateway on an EC2 instance. Okay, so your EC2 instance will act as a storage gateway. What is the difference here? The difference here is that instead of the storage gateway being locally inside your on-prem, it's actually on AWS. That's the only difference here. Okay, you are still running this as a VM, which basically, because it's an EC2, you're running it as a VM. But because it's not on your on-prem, you really don't get the caching advantage. Because remember, when I talked about storage gateway on-prem, I told you that you can cache your data locally so that you can have fast access. But if you're actually using the VM if you're actually using storage gateway on an EC2 instance, then it doesn't like make sense for you to actually have caching enabled over here. I mean, you could, but it doesn't make much of a difference because you're anyway coming all the way to AWS, right? You might as well directly connect to one of the storage solutions. But still, it's giving you a single endpoint for all of that. However, you don't get that local caching advantage, and you don't get that local latency advantage where you can quickly access data. And obviously, if the connection to AWS is interrupted, no access to data, right? So this is an option if you still want to use storage gateway, but you don't have the infrastructure to either run it as a VM inside your own on-premises, or you don't have the money to go buy hardware, you can definitely use it on AWS. And in fact, in the demo, I have actually created the storage gateway on an EC2 instance, and I'll show you how it works. All right, let's talk about the different modes. File gateway mode, like I said, it exposes an NFS or an SMB endpoint on the storage gateway. And this is basically connected to a bucket on AWS. So you will have a bucket on AWS, which you're going to map to the storage gateway as a file gateway. And whatever you're storing on the storage gateway basically gets replicated onto the S3 bucket, right? That's essentially what is happening. And we'll see this in action actually. And then you have the tape gateway mode, which is, so if you guys have heard about the concept of tape drives, right? I mean, it's still used for a lot of archiving purposes. In a lot of places, it's still used where you have the physical tapes which you're inserting into a tape silo in order to either back up your data or retrieve your data. Essentially, what is happening here is the tape drives have been virtualized, just like how your physical systems have been virtualized and have become EC2 instances. Your tape drives have been virtualized, and you have this tape library or virtual tape library is what you would call it, a VTL, right? You have a virtual tape library that is created in S3 as well as in Glacier. So anytime you want to archive something, your storage gateway will expose an iSCSI VTL endpoint, and you can use that endpoint to basically write data or archive data. And that data is basically going to get archived as VTL or virtual tape libraries or tapes on Glacier or S3. Now, like you already know, archives on S3 or Glacier, they are like a single archive containing all of the files. And if you want to pull out a file from the archive, you have to kind of pull out the entire archive. So the same concept applies over here. And finally, you have the volume gateway mode. Not finally, second last, you have the volume gateway mode, which is basically where an iSCSI interface is available on your storage gateway, which you can map as a volume to your application servers. So for your application servers, this storage gateway will actually appear as a volume using the iSCSI interface. And on the back end, this is basically creating snapshots on EBS. So any data that you want to save is basically getting snapshot, like it's creating snapshots on AWS. So whatever you're writing over here, that gets snapshotted as an EBS snapshot. Essentially, that's what's happening. So you're not actually having like a physical volume behind it. It's essentially getting snapshotted. And the final mode, which I don't think I have it on this, I don't think I have it on this PPT, but essentially you also have the FSX file gateway mode. You have the FSX for Windows file gateway mode. Same thing. you're going to have an NFS or an SMB endpoint that's available, but instead of S3, it's basically going to be FSX for Windows, right? Just like what we created, but it's going to be an endpoint that's available for mapping. Okay, so too much talking. Let's move into the demos, and I will show you how to create a storage gateway and activate it, and then map the file gateway to the on-prem system. All right, for storage gateways, you go to storage gateway, and then you have the option to create a gateway. When you do this, you do have, like I said, all of those four options, which is the file gateway, FSX gateway, volume gateway, and tape gateway. Right now, I'm just going to show you the file gateway as of now, because we've already mapped the FSX. No need to do it again. So I'm going to create a file gateway. You go next. And here, like I said, this is a software that AWS gives you. So if you're running an ESXi VMware environment, you can actually download that image and then run that as a VM inside your on-prem. If you're using Microsoft Hyper-V, download the image for that. If you're using KVM, download the image for that. If you're using a hardware appliance, obviously you can order the appliance, so you can map it with the hardware. But in our case, we are going to use an Amazon EC2 instance, which basically means we are going to put our storage gateway on AWS instead of having it on-prem. Now, when you do this, you get an option to launch an instance, which will basically get you to the page. It's already pre-selected the AMI for the storage gateway, so you don't need to like select an AMI or anything like that. You just need to select a system. Now, one thing I should tell you here that you should at least go for a minimum M4.xlarge. This should be the minimum, okay? Any other system, I've tried multiple systems, it's just not going to work. You need to go for a minimum M4.xlarge or greater. Or a C5.2xlarge or something like that or greater, right? Because it needs to have at least 4 vCPUs and at least 16 GB of RAM if you need a storage gateway to work. So I've already got an M4.xlarge already running, and that's kind of already activated. But essentially, you need to start a system with that configuration. So when you do this, just make sure you select M4.xlarge at least, and then do it. Okay, so once you launch your EC2, once you launch that EC2 instance, then you go next over here. Then you select how the endpoint is going to be accessible. For now, I'm just going to make it publicly accessible. Of course, you can make it accessible only within your VPC if you wish to. And then I will go next. And here you need to put in the IP address. So the IP address being the IP address of the EC2 instance that you created, right? So you need to take the IP address and you need to basically put that in over here and then hit next. Now I'm not going to hit next over here because I've already activated this. This is basically the option to connect to the gateway. After this, it's pretty much done. You just have one more screen that is saying activate gateway. So if let me see if this is possible. It's already activated, so it's probably going to give me some error. Yeah, it's unlikely this is going to work. Let me actually quickly replicate this. Okay, that EC2 is just coming up. Okay, so when you do that, you will come to this screen, basically to activate the gateway. So you can select like the time zone that you're in. So I'll select that. I will give it a name. Okay, and then I will activate the gateway. And here is where you will have local disks that are part of the gateway. Now, I'm not sure if this actually created the local disks. Nope, it did not. Let me actually create one more volume. So I'm basically creating one more volume to attach to that storage gateway as my cache volume. Okay, but again, this is kind of pointless because you're already on AWS, so there's no real point in like creating this cache volume. But anyways, just for the sake of showing you how it's done, let me do that. Okay, let me refresh this. So essentially my instance that I just created, it should have two volumes, the default volume of 80 gigabytes that it comes with, plus an additional 150 GB volume that I attached, which should allow me to select it as a cache option here. Let's just give it 1 minute, and there you go. So I have attached that 150 GB here. You can see that I can either set it to unallocated or I can set it to cache, right? So if I set it to cache, everything that I write to the storage gateway will also get cached to this drive apart from putting it on S3, right? Because I'm creating a file gateway, it is obviously going to write to S3. So without me having to only put files to S3, it also caches the files on the storage gateway, right? And essentially I need to just save and continue. But I'm not going to do this because I've already created a storage gateway, so I don't need a second one here. So I'll cancel out of this. And in fact, I'll just delete this instance. Okay, so I've already created a similar gateway before, which is this file gateway here. Now, once you create a gateway, you need to create the share. All right. So the gateway is available, it's created, but I also need to create a share because the gateway is the server and the share is the mapping to whichever bucket or something that I'm mapping it to, right? So I can create a share and I can say create file share. I'll select the gateway that I'm creating the file share for. So this is the one that I created before. So I'll do that. Just give me 1 second. Let me just actually remove this gateway just to avoid any confusion. Okay, so just the one gateway. So if I go to file shares and if I create a file share, I do get the gateway that I have. So S3 bucket name or based on access point or access point area. So I think this was already discussed in the S3 session on how you can get access to your buckets using different ways. But I'll just leave it to the bucket name here. And let me open up my So I have multiple buckets that I've already created in S3. So here is one of the buckets. It's called labs demo source. So I'll take that and I'll put that here. So labs demo source is the bucket name that this file gateway will map to, and that is in Mumbai. And I do have other options as well. So I will select NFS. That's the one I need, which I'm using for mapping. And I can enable logging if I wish to. I'll just leave the cache refresh to none. And if I need a notification every time a file gets uploaded, I can do that. But I really don't want to do that because obviously, if you're having hundreds of files, you're going to get a lot of notifications. And if you go next here, you get to select the storage class that you want. You get additional options that are actually very specific to S3 itself, like the encryption, the roles that are available, etc. If I go next, again, some additional options in terms of the permissions of the files that are going to get created, etc. And I can go next, but that's the last step. So this is the last step. So I'm not going to create this because I've already created a file share with the same settings that is available over here. So let me just quickly refresh what I have done so far. Just give me a second. So again, this is AWS, and what I have here is I have an S3 bucket, okay, and I have the storage gateway that I created, and this is the gateway. And now I have created a share. Okay, I have created share mapping. Okay, so essentially I've mapped the storage gateway to this S3 bucket. Now this storage gateway also has an endpoint that is available. Okay, the storage gateway also has an endpoint that is available, which is basically an NFS endpoint, because remember I did select NFS when I was creating this. So this is an NFS endpoint that is available, right? So now I can get other EC2 instances to map to that NFS endpoint. Or in fact, if I have VPN that is connected to my office or my home network, and if I have a PC over here, then obviously I can use that VPN and also map it to that storage gateway, right? So if this is my on-prem, let's make this a little bit better. So if this is my on-prem, I can have VPN connectivity, okay? And then any servers that I have here, right? Whether that be a VM or any local machines that I have here, I should be able to ideally map it over the VPN. I should be able to ideally map it and connect to the storage gateway, right? And in fact, I'll show you how this works. And this one, I will be able to actually map it to my local system, the one that I'm using right now to do all of this. I will actually show it to you on my local system. Obviously, you need VPN for that. So here's what I've done. I have created the storage gateway and I've created a file share. Okay. And then I have all of these EC2s that I can map to it. I can also map from my on-prem to that storage gateway. Let's see how that works. So I have this file share that is created. And if you scroll down, you have the commands over here in order to map that file share, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my VPN connected back on. And let me pull up my local machine. So this is my local PC, guys. This is my machine that I'm talking to you right on. This is my local machine here. Okay. I'm going to map the storage gateway over here. So essentially what's going to happen is once I map it, I'm going to see my S3 bucket as a drive over here. That's essentially what's going to happen. Okay. So let's see if that works or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map it on Windows. So I'll take this drive, this one. I'll copy this. And let me slightly modify that. And I will put this to Z drive. Okay. Let me first ensure that this is actually reachable. Yeah, so it's reachable, so I should be able to map it. Okay, so this is the command to map it. Let me take that. Let me pull up the command line. I hope this is visible. And where is my system here? Now keep an eye on the system on the right side over here. You should see the drive pull up here as soon as I map it. Okay. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to map it to the Z drive. Enter. There you go. So you see mapped over here. On my local system right now is an S3 bucket that has been mapped directly to my local system. So if I open this, here is what I see. Let's go to the S3 bucket and see is that the same thing. This is my S3 bucket, labs, demo, sources, exactly the same thing, right? So if I open this, and let me actually copy some files into this, and let's see if it shows up on S3, okay? So what I'm going to do is, let me actually pull up some files. Yes, so I'm just going to copy like 3 files over here. I'm just going to like 3 pictures. So I'm copying that over here. As you can see, it's a network drive, so it's just going to take a few seconds to write it. Now, am I writing directly to the bucket or am I writing to the storage gateway? This is a very important thing to understand here. What I have mapped here is not actually my bucket. What I've mapped here is actually my storage gateway endpoint. Okay, so I am actually writing to the storage gateway right now. Okay, the storage gateway will eventually asynchronously copy that over to the S3 bucket. All right, so right now what's happening is it's actually getting copied onto the storage gateway. So let's see that. Let's see, it's just that last 1 second it took to finish. So if I refresh here, you see it's not yet in my bucket. So although it is showing me over here, it's not yet in my bucket because it is yet to copy from the storage gateway onto the S3 bucket here. So let's see. Let's give it a minute. That initial copy, and there you go, it's done. So you see here, 3 pictures have come up, the 3 files that I've copied. So essentially what I'm seeing here is basically my bucket. Okay, so if let's say I delete this. I deleted 2 files from my bucket. Come back here, refresh. It's going to take a second because I'm seeing the storage gateway. I'm not actually seeing the bucket. Now this is a cache on the storage gateway, so this might actually remain there. Okay, we'll see when it gets deleted. However, I hope that this makes it very clear to you what the storage gateway is used for. It is basically going to be an intermediary between you, which is on-prem, which is right now I am acting like an on-prem because I've mapped this locally on my local machine, and AWS. So whether that be S3 or volume drive or tape drive or whatever you want to do, storage gateway is basically going to act as an intermediary so that you don't have to directly map to a service. In fact, you can't directly map a shared drive to S3, right? You have to use some software to do that. But storage gateway kind of acts on your behalf for that. Okay, I think you're basically seeing the cache over here. So this is not actually present on the S3 bucket, but I hope that part is clear. Any questions, guys, before we move on? Okay, I don't see any questions so far. Let me in fact just show you. Let me also map this storage gateway to my EC2 instance. You can see at the moment I have the EFS mapped, I have the FSX mapped over here, but I don't have the storage gateway mapped. So let me actually just do that as well. Let me just create a directory called STW. And then I'm going to go back to my storage gateway on Linux command. I'm just going to take this command over here. And I'm going to mount path will be /storage gateway. And there you go. I have the storage gateway also mapped over here. So essentially now I should see the same thing that I'm seeing on my local machine, which means if I go into cd sww and if I run ls-la, there you see, I see the files that are present on the storage gateway, which includes the cache files and not the one on S3 as well. Okay, I hope that part is clear to you. Let's move on. So when you're talking about selecting the right type of storage for you, because we've talked about so we talked about all of these different options for you when it comes to block storage, file storage, object storage, and hybrid as well. So when does it really like how do you make that decision for which one do you go with? Block storage, which we discussed the last time, if you essentially want a hard drive where you are basically going to use that for storing your normal system files, or you're going to run a database on it, or you want to run enterprise applications, or you're doing any kind of big data processing, definitely go with your EBS, right? File storage, if you have a lot of application-based files that you need, again, we discuss unstructured data, right? And you need a managed shared file service, then obviously EFS or FSX, whichever fits your use case. If you're only using Linux systems, then you can go for EFS. If you're using Windows and Linux, then definitely go for FSX for Windows. And if you really want a high performance one, go for FSX for Lustre. Then object storage, which we've already discussed in our very first session, which you will be using if you have any cloud native data applications, backup and recovery, like you want to put your files on it, store there like as backups or something. Hybrid storage as well. For example, right now I demonstrated hybrid storage where I'm making use of the storage gateway to kind of use S3 bucket as my actual storage instead of just directly connecting this S3 bucket. And of course, hybrid solutions. And if you want to transfer data into AWS, like you want to move data into AWS, just like how I did right now, then obviously this is the storage gateway is the option for you. Okay, let's talk about additional ways you can bring your data into AWS, which is AWS DataSync, AWS Transfer for SFTP, as well as the AWS Snow family. Now, let me see if I can first show you the AWS Snow family. So we so far have talked about, bringing your data in through the storage gateway, putting your data on S3 buckets, etc., etc. But what if your data is too large for you to actually transfer it over the internet? Like you have several terabytes of data, and it doesn't really make sense for you to transfer it over the internet. So how do you then move your data into AWS? This is where the entire Snow family comes in. So first of all, you have something called the AWS Snowball. This is a physical device. It is in fact a military grade physical device, which means it can stand a lot of abuse. So if you throw it around and all, it's not going to break. In fact, they tested this. If you go look at the AWS channel, YouTube channel, you can see there's a test where they're actually putting a bomb next to it and they're blowing it up, and it's still fine. So it is definitely military grade equipment. So what this is essentially this Snowball contains multiple hard disks inside it. All right. So there are hard disks inside it, which basically together act like a storage system. In fact, the snowballs, there are two types of snowballs in multiple types, but there is a snowball that just stores data, which basically means it just has hard disks in it. But there is also snowballs which actually come with CPU. Which basically means it actually comes with an EC2 instance inside it, okay? And then you have all of your disks that are part of it. So it comes with an EC2 plus the disks, which basically means the Snowball can also act like a storage server, right? So regardless of whether you're actually taking a compute-based Snowball or you're just taking a Snowball for storage, what you're essentially doing is you have to order this, and AWS is going to ship this to you to wherever you are, your on-premises. And then what happens is you plug this into your existing data center, or you plug this into your local on-prem or wherever you want to plug it in to transfer data into this. Once you put all of your data into this, you send this back to AWS, right? And then once AWS gets this, they will plug this into their network and then put your data into either an S3 bucket or your EBS volumes or whatever you want to put that into, right? So essentially, this is a physical way to transfer your data, where AWS will ship you this device, you plug this into your network, you put your data on it, and then you send it to AWS, and then AWS dumps it into an S3 bucket or something like that, so that you can get access to your data. Like I said, if you choose a Snowball that comes with some compute, you get the option where it will act like an NFS storage server. So you can leave it plugged into your network and keep storing data into it until you decide to send it back. But what if, what if that is not enough? What if, okay, so I wanted to mention this separately, which is Snowball Edge, which is basically the compute module snowballs, which I just mentioned right now, where you get an EC2 instance kind of inside the Snowball itself, instead of just the storage. So what if you don't want such a large device? Because these devices are like 80 terabytes, 100 terabytes, 150 terabytes, etc. Right? What if you don't want such a large device? What if you just have some small data, or what if you're in a remote location and you can't carry this because it's not a small device? It is a little bit heavy. So what if you can't carry it all the way around wherever you're taking it? So this is where AWS kind of came up with a Snow Cone, which is much smaller version of this, right? I believe this has, let me see. Sorry, source gateway. Just trying to show you the different capacities that are available for each one of them. Yeah, so Snowball Edge Optimize, it has like 80 terabytes of usable storage, and Snowball with an EC2, which comes with like 24 vCPUs and 32 gigs of RAM. So it's not like a small instance. It's extremely capable. 80 terabyte available for use. Then you also have compute optimized. Okay, I can't seem to find that right now. So probably I'll probably look up that later and let you know. But it's a much smaller device. Essentially, you get much smaller storage, but obviously it's like a small device, so you can literally carry it anywhere. In fact, one of the use cases for this was when the California fires actually happened. They have these remote offices, within the forest or within the woodland, where they have to get that data out as soon as possible. So you really don't have an option where you can carry the snowballs across those, locations, which is terrain where you have to literally hike. You can't carry these big devices. So essentially, they had to take a bunch of snow cones there, and they dumped all of that data into the snow cone. And they were able to save that data during those wildfires that happened in California. So it's just one of the use cases. Okay, so what if you have data that cannot fit in all of this? Because like we said, we saw an 80 terabyte one. And in fact, there are snowballs that are 120 terabytes, etc. But what if you have much more? What if you have petabytes of data? How do you bring that into AWS? AWS thought about this, and they bought in something called an AWS Snowmobile, which is literally a truck. They will send you a truck which is filled with hard disks, or you can think of it like this: this is a truck that is filled with snowballs. Think of it like that. Like there are like hundreds of snowballs inside it. Obviously not this big, but essentially it's a container that is filled and filled with a lot of hard disk storage that is available for you for use. So instead of a smaller one, you have so much more storage. I believe this comes with about 100 petabyte of capacity. One of the use cases for this was where there was a company that did a lot of mapping, just like how Google Maps are there. There's a lot of mapping data. So when they wanted to move their data into AWS, they had close to 100 petabyte of data. So they requested for the snowmobile. The snowmobile came, they dropped off this container, and obviously the truck went away because it's no point the truck staying there. So they dropped off the container. They connected the container directly into their data center. It took them about approximately 6 months for them to transfer all of that data into the snowmobile, because it's not just a copy paste job. You don't just copy the data and paste it into your snowmobile. You have to do deduplication. You have to make sure that you have backups. You do the proper archiving, and obviously you're not just going to dump all of your data and then just say tata bye bye, take my data. That's not going to happen, because you also need a backup in your data center, right? So it took them some time. And obviously they were able to get all of this data successfully migrated into AWS. There is no other way that you can get that much amount of data into anywhere else. There's no way you have a data connection that is fast enough or large enough, because it's not just about speed. You have to pay for how much data you're transferring as well. So there is no way you can do this online. So this is the only option as of now, any provider that's offering you today as of now. Snowmobile. Any questions before we move on? All right. I just want to quickly talk about this other two options where you can bring your data into AWS. One is the AWS DataSync, and the other is AWS Transfer for SFTP. AWS Transfer for SFTP is a pretty simple and straightforward service. SFTP transfer is secured file transfer protocol. So you can basically use FTP clients to connect into AWS to transfer your data. Okay. Before this, what you had to do is you essentially had to launch an EC2 instance, right? You had to launch an EC2 instance, and you had to make this EC2 instance an FTP server, right? And then you were able to do this. But essentially, AWS is saying, don't waste time trying to launch your own EC2 and trying to launch your own FTP server. Instead, we have this SFTP service where essentially you are not managing any EC2s, you're not managing any servers. You create this service and you create users that can use this service, and essentially you will use those same usernames to use something like FileZilla or any FTP application that you want to use. You can just use that to transfer data over SSH or SFTP basically. And obviously that will be mapped to like either an S3 bucket or something like that, so that whatever you're transferring over FTP is essentially going to get saved into a bucket. Unfortunately, I don't have a demo of this, and in fact, we're running a little bit short of time, else I would have tried to show this to you. But it's a pretty simple and straightforward process. You have an FTP application, you are going to get the endpoint. When you create the service, you will get an endpoint into which you're going to connect from your FTP application. And then you're just using normal SFTP transfer to transfer your data into AWS. This is good if you have, some amount of data, but if you have a large amount of data, then you obviously don't want to use this method to transfer. And then the final option here is AWS DataSync. DataSync is a service which constantly ensures, or you can think of it like an agent which keeps copying your data over to AWS, or the other way. You can kind of schedule it both ways. So instead of a storage gateway, this is kind of like a manual process where you're going to use the data sync service and you're going to create tasks. Okay, these tasks means you're copying from a source to a destination. Okay, so you will create a task where there will always be a source and a destination. For example, in this case, a task can be a source being your application server and the destination being your S3 bucket. All right. However, this is not just for transferring data between your on-prem and AWS. You can in fact create tasks where you transfer data from S3 to EFS, right? You can do that as well. You can transfer data like that as well internally between the AWS services, or you can from FSx for Windows, you can use that for transferring it to EFS. There is no real other way you can do this other than using something like a storage gateway, and then you have to do multiple mappings, and you have to copy from one and paste it to the other. So it's not an easy way, but with DataSync, you can do it pretty straightforward, where you can easily move data across, whether that is from application servers to AWS, or from AWS to application servers, or within AWS. All right. I think I have a quick demo that I can show you for this. Yeah, so essentially you will have to first create, within DataSync, you have two options here. You are either creating something called a DataSync agent, or you are creating DataSync for replicating data within AWS. Okay, these are two different options. So if you want to copy data from on-prem, you need to have something called a DataSync agent. This is very similar to how your storage gateway software works. Basically, AWS will give you the software which you're going to run as a VM on your on-prem. Okay, and this is going to act as an agent on behalf of the instances that are behind it. So when you want to copy from source to destination, your source will always be your DataSync agent, and then your destination will either be your S3 bucket or EFS or something like that. But right now, the demo that I'm going to show you with DataSync is where you're copying data from S3 to EFS, or vice versa, or even from one S3 bucket to another S3 bucket, right? So let me see if I can show you that. So these are all tasks that I've previously created and which have been successful. So let me actually clear some of this. If I may create a new folder here. So I have two buckets here, lab demo source and lab demo destination. You know what? In fact, just instead of from copying from a bucket to bucket, let me actually copy from a bucket into EFS. Let me actually do that. So right now my EFS has one folder called samples, and it has two more files. Let me actually create one more folder here, and I'm going to create this folder as demo. So there is a demo folder. This is EFS. Okay, I am right now looking at my EFS, and let me actually go in that. So if you look at this, there is nothing inside this EFS folder. Inside EFS, I have created a folder called demo, and there is nothing inside this folder. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to create, in fact, I'm just going to use the samples over here. So what I'll do is I will create a task. I will create a new location. If you've already created a location, you can always go ahead and select existing location. So this is basically a source location and destination location. Okay. So my source location in this case is Amazon S3, and my bucket is labs demo source bucket, and my folder is samples. Okay, because I have some files inside this. So if I go into samples, so these are some of the files that I have inside the samples, inside the lab source demo bucket. And then I can auto generate. So for example, if I do not already have a role selected, I can actually just click on auto generate and it will create a role for me. Okay. And I can go next. But because I've already created this source, I'll just actually, in fact, just select choose existing. And I will actually just select my bucket. Okay. But if you're doing this for the first time, you'll basically create new location. And I'll go next. Now I will create a new location here for my FSX, for my EFS. So I will select Amazon EFS, and here you can see my EFS is already there. So I'll select EFS. The mount path, I will put this as demo, because that's a folder that I created. Okay, where is I will just use any one of them, that's fine. And I will use the EFS security group. Okay, I'll go next. Okay, so I'll create a task name and I'm going to call this S3 to EFS. Demo S3 to EFS. Some additional options in terms of what do you want to verify when transferring the data. Do you want to do the entire source location, or do you want to do specific files or folders, right? I'm doing the entire source location because I've already given the samples. But if I want, I can actually just select the bucket and then I can say specific folder and then I can say samples if I wish to, right? But I've already created it like that, so I'll just select that one. Some more additional options, I will leave all of them at default. If I want, I can repeat this schedule. So if I want to constantly have any files that are copied over automatically without me having to create this task and run it every single time, I can actually schedule this hourly. So all of the files on my S3 will automatically get copied um, every hour automatically onto my EFS without me having to do it manually. But I'm not scheduling that right now. And I'm not logging anything. I don't want to log anything right now, but obviously you want to do this in production. And I will go next. I'll create a task. Okay, so that task is created. Now I need to run that task, right? So I will go here and I will say start, and I will say start with defaults. Before I do that, here is my source location, which is my bucket lab source demo. And the path is samples, and my destination is my EFS file share, and the path is /demo. So I'll start, and I'll start with defaults. And you can see it's currently showing as running. So let's just wait for it to start up. In the meantime, let me just show you my EFS, the demo folder. It is still empty. Okay, so the task is not yet done. The task is running. We'll give it a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, please do post it in the chat. Still nothing, so it hasn't copied anything yet. Still running. Okay, so this could take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, what I'll do is let me just quickly cover the last topic for today, which is the AWS backup option. Now, before, when you were talking about backups on AWS, for example, with EBS, you used to do something called snapshots. With your S3 buckets, you used to do replication or move it to Glacier or something like that, right? So everything was, all over the place. And there was like for your databases also, you used to do snapshots. So there was no like centralized location where you could manage all of your backups. This is that centralized location, right? So it's not a new service per se. It's basically bringing all of your existing backup solutions like into a centralized location, right? Where you can manage all of your backups. You can run your backups in certain schedules. So instead of setting up, separate backups in EC2s and separate backups in EBS and separate backups in RDS and all of that, you can kind of manage all of that from a single location. So if we were to look up, okay, looks like our task is done over here. Let me see the history. Okay, the history says it was success. So let's see if it actually copied anything. Yep. So you can see here are all of our files within the demo folder. You can see it automatically copied from S3 into EFS. So this is what you can use DataSync for. You can use DataSync for similarly copying from your existing on-prem into S3, into EFS, into FSX, or you can use it for internally copying from FSX to EFS, or S3 to EFS, or EFS to FSX, whichever way you want to like copy it internally as well. And of course, you can schedule these runs repeatedly, which means you don't have to worry about manually having to keeping on copying data. It will automatically do it for you if you run it on a schedule. But because we didn't select a schedule, like we didn't create a schedule, then it's not going to run with a schedule. Okay, the last option, which is backup. So AWS backup is where you can centrally manage all of your backup options, right? Now, first of all, you will create something called backup vaults. So this is where all of your backups will be kind of stored. Then you can create your backup plans, all right? And then you have protected resources. So these are the resources that are going to be backed up, essentially. So if I go to my dashboard, you can see here, it tells you go create a backup plan if you want to create frameworks for continuously making sure that the plans are working properly. And you can over here see all of the jobs that have run in the last 24 hours. Because this is a demo training account, there's nothing really running here. But essentially, what you have here is I can create a backup plan, and I can start with a template, or I can build a new template, right? So if I say 35-day retention period for template, I can give it a backup plan name. I can say demo backup. And here I have to create backup rules. So backup rules are probably like how often do you want it, like what is the retention period for your backup, right? So if I say demo rule 1, so I'll select like whichever backup vault that I created, and here is a frequency, like how often do I want to back it up, and also like do I want to move that to cold storage, for example, like Glacier or something like that, and how many backups do I want to retain, right? So if I say backup every day, and if I say retain for 10 days, essentially it will be having backup of like, it'll essentially be having a backup of the last 10 days, right? And I can obviously also copy it to any other destinations as well. So this is a backup rule. I think there is already a backup rule that I've created for daily backups, right? And okay. Okay, first of all, you will need to go ahead to your protected resources, and you will need to first create the resources that need to be backed up. You need to list your resources that need to be backed up before you can actually create the plan, because in your plan you have to select the resources that you're going to protect. So if you say create on-demand backup here, you can back up your Aurora database, your DynamoDB, your DocumentDB, your EBS, EC2, EFS, FSX, and a lot of other options, including your storage gateway and RDS as well. So here you can create your on-demand backups, and obviously in your backup plans, you can create your additional backups as well. So for example, here, this is an EFS backup rule that I've created. Okay, so I already have a backup plan that I've created for EFS, and this is the backup rule that's there for it. As you can see, it's a daily backup rule that runs at 5, and it'll expire after 5 weeks. So essentially, I have 5 weeks of backup that are there for the EFS. So this is essentially going to be used if you want to have all of your backups like in a single location, instead of you having to manage your backups separately, like doing your EBS separately somewhere else, etc. So I think with that, we have come to the end of our session. I want to thank you for joining in. Are there any questions that we can take? Soumya has a question. Yep. Sachin, do you want to take that question from Soumya?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to vouchers and all, for sure we do have rewards, vouchers and AWS credits for the active participants throughout the bootcamp. So please actively participate in the bootcamp. At the end, for sure we'll do have those vouchers and discounts which you're looking for. And if you still have query, please reach out to me. On the Discord forum, we can help you with that.
All right. I guess we'll give it one more minute. If anybody has any questions, please do post it in the chat. You're welcome, Harish, and thank you for being part of the session. Wonderful to have you on.
And yeah, I will like to make a reminder again for the guys who have not just joined us. We do have a chat group, kind of a forum where we can share the materials. The link is in the description of the video. So please do register with us so we can provide you all the required access. The forums, the materials, or any kind of help you need outside the session, we can reach out to you with the help of that registration form. So please do sign up for that. I think we don't have any question.
Yep. Is there any resource you recommend for preparation? So all of that, Harish, will be available in the chat group that Sanchit just mentioned. So please make sure that you register and ensure that you are added to the chat group where we share all of these resources, etc., where it can help you with the examination. Okay, Sanchit, I guess we can wrap it up.
Sounds good. Thank you guys for being with us. As we mentioned, this is our first session for 2022. We actively look forward to have many more in upcoming weeks. For sure, we do have wonderful sessions lined up for next week. The announcement of the speaker, the timing, and the content of the session will be released soon. Thank you for your patience, and I hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you so much for joining. And Faisal, this was an amazing session. We will love to have many more for sure. And thank you so much for putting out the quick demos and good stuff around that stuff. Thank you guys, and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.